Alrighty, yo, what is going on everybody? It's your boy Mr. DDG94 back with another reaction video. Today we're going to react to how to make a great game even better. This is SmackDown versus Raw 2007. We still going through our SmackDown versus Raw series. As you already know, I've already stated which is the best ones. I've already said that SmackDown versus Raw 2007, 2011, and 2006 are arguably the best WWE video games ever made, in my personal opinion. I don't think that, I know a lot of people will say, Here Comes the Pain, but me personally, I find Here Comes the Pain to be a little overrated when it comes to these other games that have evolved and took this shit to a better plateau than what Here Comes the Pain did. Here Comes the Pain was good for its time, but the way how these games evolve from year to year, I can't look at an outdated game like Here Come the Pain and say that's arguably the best of the best of the best. I can't do it. The consensus probably can, but I bet you if you go back and play it, and then you play one of these SmackDown versus Raw games, you will see how they actually did make these games better than what Here Comes the Pain was. And I think you'll have a better understanding and better appreciation for these games, considering that the 2K games are fucking garbage. But anyways, so without further ado, let's get right into this.
There's no doubt that SmackDown vs. Raw 2007 is iconic, even for today's standards. This game was released on November 14th, 2006 in the US and instantly made waves following the huge success of SmackDown vs. Raw 2006. The graphics and presentation made a huge jump from the year prior. General Manager mode was back and arguably in its strongest form. Even the single-player story mode was filled with unique cutscenes and voice acting. And of course, the gameplay was electrifying and fast-paced. However, there was still something missing. Including Legends, SmackDown vs. Raw 2007 sported a roster of 67 playable wrestlers like Kurt Angle, The Undertaker, Triple H, The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Rob Van Dam, and more. Not bad, but given some of the superstars that had major pushes in 2006 didn't make the game, leaves room for improvement. I'm going to dive in and determine 5 additions to the roster that would have elevated this game even further had they been included. As a disclaimer, the cutoff date in which superstars could make the game was WrestleMania 22. There are multiple names on this list who joined or rejoined the WWE following WrestleMania 22 who are not eligible to make the final cut no matter what. Number 1. Jeff Hardy. Jeff Hardy made his return to the WWE in August after a hiatus of just over 3 years. Jeff was instantly thrust into the singles spotlight, butting heads with then WWE Champion Edge, feuding with Johnny Nitro and ultimately winning the Intercontinental Championship for the second time in his career on the October 2nd episode of Monday Night Raw. Hardy would drop the title for a week to Johnny Nitro only to regain the championship for a third time on the November 13th edition of Monday Night Raw, one day prior to the release of SmackDown vs. Raw 2007. So imagine yourself, a young preteen just about to enter your teenage years. Last night you just witnessed Jeff Hardy roll up that bastard Johnny Nitro with a crucifix pin. Melina is looking right, but she's upset. You are hyped. You were fortunate enough to get hooked up with the SmackDown vs. Raw on release after you spent the first few months of school pretending to be focused, so you'd be rewarded with this absolute banger of a game. And you can't even recreate this Raw moment because Jeff Hardy, the now Intercontinental Champion, isn't featured in this game despite returning to the WWE 3 months prior. Boo. Not only was Jeff heavily featured on Raw at this time as the face of the mid-card, but he would also go on to feature in a number of high-profile and fondly remembered pay-per-view matches throughout late 2006 and into the build-up of the coming WrestleMania. Unforgiven, Survivor Series, Armageddon, though Joey Mercury wasn't too fond of this one, New Year's Revolution, the Royal Rumble, No Way Out, and we all know what happened at WrestleMania in that Money in the Bank ladder match. There was great anticipation to be able to play as Jeff in SmackDown vs. Raw 2008, and that's because Jeff Hardy should have been in SmackDown vs. Raw 2007. Number 2. MVP. Another highly anticipated superstar to come to SmackDown vs. Raw 2008 was MVP, who made his first on-screen appearance in August 2006, much like Jeff Hardy's return. While Jeff was energizing Monday nights, the quote, highest paid free agent in the history of sports entertainment, Montel Vontavious Porter, was heating up Friday nights. I say heating up because almost immediately he found himself entwined into a rivalry with the Big Red Machine, Kane. The highly coveted free agent kicked his WWE career off by getting involved with the Brothers of Destruction, scoring some big victories over Kane and participating in WWE's Final Inferno match at the time of this recording. MVP returned from his kayfabe injury and again found himself locking up with one of the more reputable names on the roster, Chris Benoit, eventually earning the United States Championship. MVP began building a large fan following despite playing a heel. His fresh look, entrance, and swagger would have added an exclamation point to the updated presentation SmackDown vs. Raw 2007 was unveiling. Ukes didn't know what WWE's plans were with the Purple Power Ranger, and they only have so much freedom as far as who makes it in. MVP did appear after the cutoff after all, but his inclusion in the roster would have taken this game from banging to ballin'. Who do you think deserves to be on this list? Of course, this is my opinion. I'd love to hear what you think down below in the comments, and please subscribe to the channel if you enjoy unnecessarily deep diving into wrestling video games that are old enough to learn how to drive. Back to the list. Number 3. The Spirit Squad. This band of easily unlikable male cheerleaders ran absolutely rampant on Raw for the majority of 2006. Debuting in January, the future show-offs, coaches, and jobbers would stay in Vince McMahon's back pocket during the Boss's feud with D-Generation X, ultimately winning the World Tag Team Championships a few months after their debut. This squad would hold these titles until Cyber Sunday, where they would drop the championships just 6 days before the game was released. During this run, they would also take part in Raw main events, receive significant television time, and have heavy involvement in any McMahon shenanigans that may have risen. Had this faction been imported into the game, we would have seen the series debuts of Kenny Dykstra and Dolph Ziggler expedited, and it would have added a bit of variety to a game that was lacking in tag teams, as many games in the series did. Their inclusion would have heavily suggested a need for some type of 5-man involvement, as that was their status quo. But that is a code that is yet to be cracked to this day, let alone nearly 2 decades earlier in 2006. This team most certainly did not miss the eligibility cutoff, so it did come as a surprise that at least some of the members were not included.
Facts.
Whether fans necessarily wanted them in the game, that's another question. Number 4. Paul London and Brian Kendrick. On the topic of tag teams, it'd be hard to argue that there were any teams hotter in 2006 than the team of Paul London and Brian Kendrick. The duo would become WWE Tag Team Champions at the Judgment Day pay-per-view on May 21st, 2006, defeating Eminem. The titles would be dropped in April of 2007, marking the longest reign in the championship's history at that time. Despite being the holders of the Blue Brand's tag team titles, they were nowhere to be seen in the game. Not only would the duo get snubbed from SmackDown vs. Raw 2007, but even more surprisingly, they didn't make the cut for the next year's game either. So you're telling me the longest reigning WWE Tag Team Champions of the Ruthless Aggression era couldn't even get featured into WWE's popular game franchise until SmackDown vs. Raw 2009? What's even crazier about this is the fact that Paul London was in SmackDown vs. Raw 2006, the game that was released the year prior. They could have just ported him over with a different attire and I'm sure people would not have complained.
Fact.
The omission of these two has got to be the biggest mystery amongst this entire list, given the fact that they had been such a focal point of a rather weak tag team division, as well as having longevity on the roster. While it's understandable that guys like Casey James, Idol Stevens, and Dave Taylor didn't make the cut, we the players were left scratching our heads wondering why Ukes and the WWE decided to exclude the game. Now of course, at the time development began and the roster had been decided, London and Kendrick weren't exactly household names. The two began the calendar year looking for some kind of way to etch themselves a spot on the main roster. That is, however, exactly what they did on their path to making history, and it was an absolute shame that Brian Kendrick and Paul London were not included in SmackDown vs. Raw 2007. Number 5. Victoria. During the Ruthless Aggression era, the women's division of the WWE was dominated by Lita, Trish Stratus, and some may even say Mickie James and Beth Phoenix. However, one of the true unsung heroes of women's wrestling is Victoria. I remember watching as a kid and thinking that Victoria was definitely borderline psychotic, but also a total badass. The 2-time women's champion was one of the women in the early 2000s that not only looked the way Vince wanted, but could also go in the ring and put on a hard-hitting match. The SmackDown vs. Raw 2007 women's roster only consisted of 7 female wrestlers, Jillian Hall and Melina on the SmackDown side, whereas Candice Michelle, Tori Wilson, Mickie James, Lita, and Trish Stratus filled out Raw's end. The fact that Jillian Hall is in the game is reason enough to land Victoria on this list all on its own. While Tori Wilson was quite the veteran at this point, and Melina and Candice Michelle certainly upped their games in the years to follow, Victoria's inclusion still would have been the correct decision over any of the aforementioned women. Her entrance theme was a banger, her finisher was absolutely brutal, and she would have provided an edge to a women's roster that was hard to care for beyond the three legends. Honorable mention: Charlie Haas. It didn't feel right to make this video without mentioning Charlie Haas. Haas was extremely talented, returning to the WWE in April 2006, just shortly missing the superstar cutoff of WrestleMania 22. This was in the middle of Shelton Benjamin's singles push, meaning Haas would have come in the game as his own man. Again, this is a guy who was in SmackDown vs. Raw 2006, so they likely could have copied the previous model and nobody would be upset. While he didn't make the game's final roster, he did make it into our hearts. The point is, SmackDown vs. Raw 2007 is an excellent game that you really can't point your finger at too many things for its time, except the weight detection system. However, I constantly found myself thinking, it would be cool if Jeff Hardy was in this game, or I wonder why London and Kendrick didn't make it in the game considering they are the damn tag team champions.
Facts.
Guess you can't win them all. While the superstars themselves may not have been included, there are quite a few superstar movesets to make it into the game, meaning those creative enough to recreate the missing wrestlers were in luck, as they could slap move presets from the likes of Jeff Hardy, Brian Kendrick or Paul London, and Charlie Haas directly onto their created wrestlers in their entirety. In 2006, there were enough online forums that held formulas for the majority of grapplers you may want to create and put into your game. I know this channel typically attracts those born in the 20th century, so for the younger audience, think community creations on 2K, but you don't have the luxury of just downloading the pre-made created wrestler. Ukes clearly had the foundation of a few of these guys to make it into the game, so it just kinda makes me say, come on! They just had to render a few hundred more animations, damn it. While so many people, myself included, have such positive memories of SmackDown vs. Raw 2007, this list goes to show there are quite a few superstars that should have been in the game. Thank you for watching. If you made it to the end, I've got a feeling you'd enjoy my 24/7.
Alrighty, so yeah, I do agree with him though. There were a couple of people that belong in this game, but it is what it is. Vince, Vince and his ways. Well, considering the times we're in now, Vince and his ways has caught up to him. So yeah, that's just gonna about do it for this one, man. It is what it is, man. Anyways, though, I will see you all in the next video. Till then, peace out.